Desmond Oba was a man of immense wealth, power, and privilege. He had everything a person could want: sprawling estates, luxurious cars, and more money than he could ever spend. Yet, his wealth was a burden rather than a blessing. Desmond was lonely, tired of meeting women who only cared about his riches. He longed for someone who would love him for who he truly was, not for the lifestyle he could provide. Sitting in his grand mansion one night, Desmond devised a plan. He would disguise himself as a simple taxi driver. This way, no one would know who he was or how much he was worth. He wanted to see if someone could love him for the man beneath the wealth. The next day, Desmond purchased an old, worn-out taxi. It had seen better days, but it suited his plan perfectly. He dressed in simple clothing and began his new adventure, hoping to find the kind of love he had dreamed about. At first, Desmond's experience as a taxi driver was like stepping into a different world. It was both exhilarating and unnerving to blend into the city without being recognized. He met all sorts of passengers, each with their own unique stories and struggles, people from all walks of life, who had no idea that the man behind the wheel was a billionaire. Desmond enjoyed the simplicity of his new disguise. For once, he wasn't surrounded by sycophants or people looking for favors, and he found a strange kind of comfort in this anonymity. One passenger, a young woman named Amina, caught Desmond's attention early on. Amina had a vibrant energy, and her laughter filled the cab, making her seem genuinely warm and kind. She talked about her dreams, her struggles, and her desire to make something of herself. Desmond was intrigued. Perhaps this was someone he could connect with. However, as time passed, Amina's request for help began. First a small loan for a supposed emergency, then another, and soon, the request grew larger and more frequent. Desmond obliged at first, wanting to believe that her intentions were pure, that maybe she genuinely needed a helping hand. But it didn't take long for him to realize that Amina was not interested in him as a person, only in what she could get from him. The realization was disheartening. Desmond had hoped that by living this simpler life, he could meet someone who saw him for the person he was on the inside. But Amina was like so many others he had met before, drawn to wealth, even if she only suspected he had it. Her relentless requests made it painfully clear what she valued most, and Desmond, with a heavy heart, ended their interactions. As he drove away after dropping her off for the last time, he felt an aching sense of defeat. Maybe this whole plan had been foolish. Maybe real love was something he would never find. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Desmond spotted a young woman standing by the roadside. There was something about her. The way she stood there, her shoulders slightly slumped from a long day, but with a gentle, hopeful expression on her face. She looked tired, but her smile as she waved for his taxi was genuine. Desmond pulled over and welcomed her into the car. Her name, he soon learned, was Olivia. From the moment she stepped into the taxi, Olivia was different. She didn't just give him an address and fall silent, or spend the ride glued to her phone. Instead, she looked at him, her eyes kind, and asked how his day had been. There was a softness in her voice, a sincerity that caught Desmond off guard. He hesitated at first, unsure of how much to share, but something in Olivia's demeanor made him feel at ease. He found himself telling her about the day, about the long hours, the interesting passengers, and even the odd quirks of driving an old taxi around the city. Olivia listened, really listened, and it was unlike anything Desmond had experienced in a long time. She asked questions, not prying or invasive, but the kind of questions that showed she cared about the answers. She asked about what he enjoyed most about driving, about whether he ever got tired of the traffic, and even what he did to relax when he wasn't working. There was no agenda behind her questions, no ulterior motive. She was simply interested in the man behind the wheel. For the first time since he had started this experiment, Desmond felt seen. Not as a means to an end, not as a wallet waiting to be opened, but as a person with thoughts, feelings, and stories worth sharing. Olivia talked, too, but not about money or grand ambitions. She spoke about her family, her younger brother who she adored, and the small joys in her life that kept her going, like the fresh flowers sold by the old lady on the corner of her street or the warmth of a good cup of tea after a long day. As they neared her destination, Desmond found himself wishing the ride could last a little longer. Olivia had brought a lightness to his evening, a sense of connection he had been desperately craving. When they finally arrived, she thanked him, her smile reaching her eyes, and paid her fare without hesitation. There was no hint of expectation, no attempt to linger or ask for more. She was simply grateful for the ride and the conversation. Desmond watched as she walked away, disappearing into the twilight. A feeling stirred within him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was fragile, like a small flame flickering against the wind, but it was there. He realized that maybe, just maybe, there were people out there who could see him for who he truly was, without the trappings of wealth or the expectations that came with it. That night, as Desmond drove through the city, the streets lit by the glow of streetlights and the hum of life all around him, he found himself smiling. He didn't know if he would see Olivia again, but the possibility was enough. It reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. He wasn't just searching for love, he was searching for a connection, for someone who would care about the man beneath the surface. And tonight, he had found a glimpse of that possibility. Maybe his plan wasn't so foolish after all. Perhaps, amidst the crowded streets and the endless stream of passengers, there was a chance he could find what he was truly looking for. And that hope, as small as it was enough to keep him going. Days turned into weeks, and Desmond found himself hoping to run into Olivia again. He kept replaying their conversation in his mind. The warmth of her smile, the sincerity in her eyes, the way she listened. He had met countless people since starting this unusual experiment, but no one had left an impression like Olivia. She had a way of making the world feel a little less heavy, and he couldn't shake the hope that he would see her once more. Then, one morning, as Desmond drove through the bustling city streets, navigating the sea of cars, people, and noise, he saw her. There she was, walking along the sidewalk, her steps purposeful yet unhurried. Desmond's heart skipped a beat. Without hesitation, he pulled over and rolled down the window. Olivia looked up, her eyes lighting up with recognition, and she smiled. A smile that sent a warmth spreading through him. "Hey, need a ride?" Desmond called out, trying to sound casual despite the rush of emotions bubbling inside him. Olivia's face brightened even more, and she nodded, stepping towards the car. "I'd love one," she replied as she got in. The scent of her floral perfume filled the small space, making Desmond feel more at ease. As they drove, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Olivia spoke about her job, how she worked long hours to support her younger brother and her mother. She spoke with such love and pride that it made Desmond admire her even more. It was clear that her family was her whole world. She didn't have much, but she was grateful for what she had, and her positivity was infectious. Desmond listened, captivated by the way she described the little joys in her life, like the evenings she spent watching old movies with her brother or the satisfaction of a home-cooked meal after a long day. There was no bitterness in her voice, no complaints about her circumstances. She was content in a way that Desmond rarely saw, even among those who had everything. "You know," Olivia said, glancing at him with a curious smile, "you're different from most taxi drivers I've met. You seem, I don't know, thoughtful." Desmond chuckled, feeling a little flustered. "I guess I've got a lot on my mind," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "Well, that's a good thing," she said. "It's nice to meet someone who thinks about life, you know? So many people just rush through it without a second thought." Desmond couldn't help but smile. Olivia had a way of seeing the world that was both simple and profound. She appreciated the small things, found joy where others might not even look, and it made Desmond want to be around her even more. Each time he saw her, he found himself falling deeper, not just for her beauty, but for her heart, her spirit, and the way she lived her life. As their rides together became more frequent, Desmond realized he needed to know if her feelings were real. He had been deceived before, and he couldn't afford to let himself fall in love with someone who might only see him as a means to an end. So, one evening, after picking Olivia up from work, Desmond decided to test her, much like he had tested others in the past. He glanced at her from the driver's seat, his fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "You know, Olivia," he began, his voice almost hesitant, Being a taxi driver isn't always easy. Some days, I barely make enough to cover my expenses." He paused, glancing at her to gauge her reaction. Olivia turned to look at him, her expression softening. "I can only imagine," she said quietly. "It must be tough, especially in a city like this." Desmond nodded, his heart pounding as he continued. "Yeah, it's not much. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever get ahead, if I'll ever have enough to make a real life for myself." He let the words hang in the air, waiting to see if her interest in him would change now that he had painted himself as a struggling, ordinary man. For a moment, Olivia was silent, and Desmond felt a pang of fear. Was this it? Would she turn away like so many others had? But then, Olivia smiled, a smile so gentle it made Desmond's chest ache. She reached over and touched his arm lightly. "Money isn't everything, Desmond," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "What matters is who you are. Being kind, being honest, loving those around you, that's what really counts. You can be the richest person in the world, but if you don't have love or kindness, what's it all for?" Desmond's heart raced, and he felt a lump form in his throat. In that moment, he knew. Olivia was different. She didn't care about what he could offer her in terms of wealth or luxury. She cared about him, the man behind the wheel, the person he truly was beneath all the layers of wealth and disguise. They continued driving, the silence between them comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. Desmond knew he had found someone special, someone worth risking everything for. Olivia's words echoed in his mind, and he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. Days passed, and Desmond found reasons to see Olivia more often. He would drive by her workplace around the time she finished her shift, hoping to catch her as she stepped out. More often than not, she would smile when she saw his car, her face lighting up as she climbed in. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Desmond told Olivia things he had never shared with anyone. His dreams, his fears, the things that kept him awake at night. And Olivia shared her life with him, too. She talked about her father, who had passed away when she was young, and how her mother had worked tirelessly to provide for her and her brother. She spoke of the nights she stayed up helping her brother with his homework, the mornings she woke up before dawn to make breakfast for her family. She was selfless, always putting others before herself, and Desmond couldn't help but admire her strength and resilience. One evening, after dropping Olivia off at her apartment, Desmond sat in his car for a long time, staring at the building she had disappeared into. He realized that he had found what he had been searching for. Not just love, but a connection. A genuine bond with someone who saw him for who he was and accepted him without question. He knew that he couldn't keep pretending forever. Sooner or later, he would have to tell Olivia the truth about who he was, about the life he led beyond the old taxi and the simple clothes. But for now, Desmond was content to take things one day at a time. He would savor each moment with Olivia, each smile, each laugh, each conversation that made him feel more alive than he had in years. He knew that the road ahead might not be easy, but with Olivia by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. As he drove away that night, the city lights blurring around him, Desmond felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps, amidst the chaos of life, he had finally found what he was truly looking for. And that hope, fragile and new, was enough to keep him moving forward toward a future that, for the first time, didn't feel so uncertain. Desmond knew the time had come to tell Olivia the truth about who he really was. He couldn't continue hiding his identity, couldn't keep pretending that his life was only about the worn-out taxi and simple rides through the city. His heart pounded as he dialed her number, asking if she could meet him at the local park that evening. He chose the park because of its tranquility, a place where he hoped she would feel comfortable enough to listen to what he had to say. The day of the meeting, Desmond arrived early, his nerves wound tight. He walked along the path, his thoughts racing. How would Olivia react? Would she feel betrayed? Would she turn her back on him? These thoughts ran in circles in his mind, each one worse than the last. He had grown to love Olivia, and the idea of losing her now, after everything, terrified him. When Olivia arrived, Desmond's heart skipped a beat. She approached with her usual warmth, her smile putting him at ease even as his own anxiety swelled. They found a bench beneath a large oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. Desmond took a deep breath, gathering the courage he needed to speak. "Olivia, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice slightly shaky. She turned to him, her eyes full of curiosity but also trust, and that made it even harder. He didn't want to break that trust. He paused, searching for the right words, then continued. "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am." Olivia furrowed her brow, but she didn't pull away. She just waited, her expression calm, allowing him the space he needed. Desmond swallowed hard and then laid it all out for her. He told her that he wasn't just a taxi driver, but a billionaire. He explained how he had grown tired of the superficial relationships his wealth attracted, how he wanted to find someone who would love him for who he was, not for what he had. And that's why he had decided to become a taxi driver, to live a simpler life, if only for a while, to see if real love could be found in the most unexpected of places. Desmond watched Olivia's face closely, waiting for anger, disappointment, or shock. He expected her to be upset, to accuse him of deceiving her, and perhaps even to walk away. But Olivia didn't do any of those things. Instead, she simply looked at him, her eyes softening. A small smile played at the corners of her lips as she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I fell in love with you, Desmond," she said gently, "not with what you have or don't have. Just you." Desmond felt a wave of emotion wash over him, and for a moment, he was speechless. He blinked, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. Here she was, the woman he had dreamed of, the woman who loved him for who he truly was. He squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with a love so deep it almost hurt. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "I never meant to deceive you. I had to know if what we had was real." Olivia nodded, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "I understand why you did it," she said, "and I'm glad you trusted me enough to tell me now. What we have is real, Desmond. I love you, not your money, not your status. Just you." Desmond pulled her into a gentle embrace, the weight of all his fears lifting from his shoulders. He held her close, feeling the warmth of her love wrap around him. In that moment, he knew. He had found what he had been searching for all along. He had found a love that was genuine, a love that wasn't influenced by wealth or power. He had found Olivia. From that day on, their bond grew even stronger. Desmond began to introduce Olivia to his world, a world of opulence and luxury, one that she had never imagined being a part of. But Olivia never changed. She remained the humble, kind-hearted woman she had always been, and that only made Desmond fall deeper in love with her. There were dinners at high-end restaurants, weekends spent in beautiful villas, and parties filled with influential people. Through it all, Olivia stayed true to herself. She was never dazzled by the wealth or the glamour. She was polite, warm, and genuine, but she never let herself be swept away by it. She was there for Desmond, not for the lifestyle he could provide. Seeing Olivia navigate his world with such grace made Desmond's heart swell with pride. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was the one for him. She was the woman he wanted by his side, the one he wanted to share his life with, the real life, with all its ups and downs, joys and challenges. It wasn't long before Desmond decided that it was time for Olivia to meet his parents. He knew it wouldn't be easy. His parents had certain expectations about who he would end up with, and Olivia, with her humble background and simple ways, didn't fit the mold they had in mind. But Desmond was determined. He wanted them to see Olivia the way he saw her, as the incredible, loving, and genuine person she was. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the glittering city below, Desmond turned to Olivia, his heart pounding once again, but this time for a different reason. "Olivia," he began, his voice soft, "I want you to meet my parents. I know it might be a little intimidating, but I want them to see the woman I've fallen in love with." Olivia looked at him, her eyes widening slightly, but then she smiled, a smile that was full of warmth and love. She reached over, taking his hand in hers. "I'd love to meet them," she said. "As long as you're by my side, I'm ready for anything." Desmond leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. He knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. And that was all that mattered. One Sunday afternoon, Desmond brought Olivia to his family home, a sprawling mansion with lush gardens, fountains, and opulence that spoke of old wealth and grandeur. The gates opened to reveal a long driveway, lined with perfectly manicured hedges, leading up to the massive front doors. Olivia had never seen anything like it. The sheer size and luxury of the estate were overwhelming, but she kept her focus on Desmond, her hand gripping his tightly for reassurance. She was determined to be herself, no matter how intimidating the surroundings might be. As they entered the grand foyer, the marble floors gleamed under the light of an enormous chandelier, and the smell of fresh flowers filled the air. Desmond's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oba, were waiting in the elegant living room. The space was furnished with antique pieces, oil paintings, and intricate rugs, a clear display of the family's wealth and status. Initially, Mr. and Mrs. Oba smiled warmly at their son, but their expressions shifted as soon as they noticed Olivia standing beside him. The warmth drained from the room, replaced by an unmistakable chill that Olivia felt deeply. She stood there, feeling the weight of their scrutinizing eyes, but she held her head high, refusing to let the coldness affect her. Desmond, sensing the change in his parents' demeanor, tightened his grip on her hand and led her forward. "Mom, Dad, this is Olivia," Desmond said, his voice full of affection. "She's the one I've been telling you about. She's kind, strong, and she loved me without knowing anything about my background." Desmond's mother, Mrs. Oba, studied Olivia for a moment before forcing a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you, Olivia," she said, her voice carefully controlled. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a reserved politeness. Mr. Oba, on the other hand, barely concealed his disapproval. He nodded curtly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in Olivia's simple attire and humble demeanor. "Desmond," Mrs. Oba began, her tone polite but unmistakably firm, "we want what's best for you. Olivia seems lovely, but she isn't from our world. She won't fit in here." Mr. Oba added, his voice deep and authoritative, "You are the heir to a vast empire, Desmond. You need someone who understands our lifestyle, someone who knows the responsibilities that come with our name. Olivia, as nice as she may be, doesn't seem to be the right fit." Desmond felt his heart sink, a mixture of anger and disbelief flooding his chest. He had expected his parents to be surprised, even hesitant, but he hadn't anticipated such blatant rejection. He glanced at Olivia, who stood quietly beside him, her face calm but her eyes betraying a hint of sadness. "Mom, Dad," Desmond began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Olivia loves me for who I am, not for what I have. Isn't that what matters? She doesn't care about the money or the lifestyle. She cares about me, the real me." Mrs. Oba sighed, her expression softening just slightly, but her resolve remained unchanged. "Desmond, love is important, but it's not everything. Marriage is about more than just love. It's about family, legacy, and making the right choices for your future." Mr. Oba nodded in agreement. "We have partnerships, connections that need to be maintained. The woman you marry will be a reflection of our family. Olivia might be a good person, but she's not the right match for you, not in the life that you're meant to lead." Desmond's frustration bubbled over, and he shook his head, his grip on Olivia's hand tightening. "I didn't expect this from you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought you'd be happy for me, that I found someone who loves me for me. But all you care about is how it looks on the outside." Mrs. Oba reached out as if to console him, but Desmond took a step back, his expression pained. "We're only thinking of your future, Desmond," she said softly. "We want you to have a wife who can support you, someone from a similar background, someone who understands this life." Desmond looked at Olivia, who hadn't said a word throughout the entire conversation. Her eyes met his, and she gave him a small, reassuring smile. A smile that told him she understood, that she didn't blame him or his parents for the way things were unfolding. "Let's go, Olivia," Desmond said finally, his voice quieter now, but resolute. He turned to his parents, his gaze steady. "I love Olivia, and if you can't accept that, then I'm sorry. I'm not going to let your prejudices destroy what we have." Without another word, Desmond led Olivia out of the living room, their footsteps echoing in the grand foyer. As they stepped outside, the warmth of the afternoon sun contrasted sharply with the chill that had filled the mansion. Olivia looked at Desmond, her eyes filled with concern. "Desmond, I don't want to come between you and your family," she said quietly. "I know how much they mean to you." Desmond stopped, turning to face her. He cupped her face gently in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "You're not coming between us," he said firmly. "They're the ones who are wrong. They don't see you the way I do. They don't understand how amazing you are, how much you mean to me. And I'm not going to let them dictate my life." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, and she smiled, leaning into his touch. "I love you, Desmond," she whispered. Desmond smiled back, his heart swelling with emotion. "I love you too, Olivia. We'll figure this out together." As they walked back to the taxi, Desmond felt a mix of emotions: anger at his parents, fear of what the future might hold, but also an unshakable sense of determination. He had found the woman he wanted to spend his life with, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be more challenges to face, but as long as he had Olivia by his side, he felt ready to take on whatever came their way. When they reached the car, Desmond opened the door for Olivia, and she slid in, her eyes never leaving his. He walked around to the driver's side, pausing for a moment before getting in. He looked back at the mansion, the place he had always called home, and felt a pang of sadness. He had hoped that his parents would embrace Olivia, that they would see what he saw in her. But they hadn't, and he couldn't change that. Desmond started the engine, and as they drove away, he reached over and took Olivia's hand in his. She squeezed his hand, her presence a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone. Together, they would face whatever obstacles lay ahead, and that thought gave Desmond a sense of peace. For the first time, he felt like he was truly in control of his own life, and he knew that as long as he had Olivia, everything would be all right. The grand mansion faded in the rearview mirror, but Desmond didn't look back. His focus was on the road ahead, on the future he was determined to build, a future that included Olivia no matter what. Desmond and Olivia left his parents' mansion, the tension still lingering in the air. The weight of his family's disapproval pressed heavily on them, and as they walked to the car, Desmond could feel Olivia's hand trembling slightly in his. He glanced at her, seeing the worry etched across her face, and it broke his heart. Once they were in the car, Olivia finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "Desmond, I love you more than anything, but I don't want to be the reason you're estranged from your family. I know how much they mean to you." She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me." Desmond reached over, taking her hand in his expression resolute. "Olivia, listen to me. I don't care about their money or their approval. All I need is you," he said firmly. "We'll build our own life, no matter what. As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Despite the challenges they faced, Desmond and Olivia's love continued to flourish. They moved into a modest apartment, far removed from the grandeur of Desmond's family estate. It was small, with creaky floors and walls that were far too thin, but it was theirs. They decorated the space with mismatched furniture and filled it with laughter, warmth, and love. Desmond found a job at a local garage, using his skills to make an honest living. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was fulfilling in a way that surprised him. He was using his hands, creating something real, and he found a sense of purpose that had eluded him during his days of luxury. Life was different now, simpler, but it was full of moments that mattered. Mornings spent sharing breakfast in their tiny kitchen, evenings curled up on the couch watching old movies, and late nights lying side by side, whispering about their dreams for the future. Desmond felt more fulfilled than he ever had in his mansion, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had once defined his life. But the strain on Olivia was evident. She saw how hard Desmond worked, how he came home with grease-stained hands and exhaustion etched across his features. She admired his resilience, his determination to make their life work despite everything. But she couldn't ignore the sacrifices he was making. She couldn't ignore the way he pushed himself, just to make sure they had enough to pay the bills and keep their modest home running. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the garage, Desmond walked through the door, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. Olivia was waiting for him, her eyes filled with love, but also with a sadness she could no longer hide. She approached him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. Desmond could feel her trembling, and he pulled back slightly, looking down at her with concern. "Olivia, what's wrong?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. "Desmond, I hate seeing you like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You work so hard, and I know you're doing it for us. But I can't help feeling like I'm holding you back. You deserve so much more. You deserve a life without all this struggle." Desmond's heart ached at her words. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Olivia, I love our life together," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'd choose this life with you over a life of luxury without you any day. Don't ever think that you're holding me back. You're the reason I keep going." Olivia looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "But Desmond, it's not just about us. It's about the future we want to build. I don't want you to have to struggle like this forever. Maybe you should try to reconcile with your parents. Not for the money, but for the future we want. I know how much they mean to you, even if you won't admit it." Desmond closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath. He knew Olivia was right. As much as he loved the life they had built, he couldn't ignore how his choices were affecting her. She deserved the best, and he wanted to give her everything. If that meant swallowing his pride and facing his parents again, then he would do it. Not for himself, but for Olivia and the life they wanted to build together. The next morning, Desmond made up his mind. He would return to his parents' home and try to make peace. He didn't know how they would react, or if they would even be willing to listen, but he had to try. He owed it to Olivia, to their future, to at least make the attempt. When he arrived at the grand estate, the sight of the sprawling mansion brought back a flood of memories, some good, some painful. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked up to the front door. The butler, who had known Desmond since he was a child, opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise. "Master Desmond," the butler said, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and warmth. "It's good to see you, sir. Your parents are in the sitting room." Desmond nodded, giving the butler a small, grateful smile before making his way through the familiar halls. His footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors, and with each step, his resolve grew stronger. When he reached the sitting room, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Desmond and Olivia left his parents' mansion, the tension still lingering in the air. The weight of his family's disapproval pressed heavily on them, and as they walked to the car, Desmond could feel Olivia's hand trembling slightly in his. He glanced at her, seeing the worry etched across her face, and it broke his heart. Once they were in the car, Olivia finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "Desmond, I love you more than anything, but I don't want to be the reason you're estranged from your family. I know how much they mean to you." She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me." Desmond reached over, taking her hand in his expression resolute. "Olivia, listen to me. I don't care about their money or their approval. All I need is you," he said firmly. "We'll build our own life, no matter what. As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Despite the challenges they faced, Desmond and Olivia's love continued to flourish. They moved into a modest apartment, far removed from the grandeur of Desmond's family estate. It was small, with creaky floors and walls that were far too thin, but it was theirs. They decorated the space with mismatched furniture and filled it with laughter, warmth, and love. Desmond found a job at a local garage, using his skills to make an honest living. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was fulfilling in a way that surprised him. He was using his hands, creating something real, and he found a sense of purpose that had eluded him during his days of luxury. Life was different now, simpler, but it was full of moments that mattered. Mornings spent sharing breakfast in their tiny kitchen, evenings curled up on the couch watching old movies, and late nights lying side by side, whispering about their dreams for the future. Desmond felt more fulfilled than he ever had in his mansion, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had once defined his life. But the strain on Olivia was evident. She saw how hard Desmond worked, how he came home with grease-stained hands and exhaustion etched across his features. She admired his resilience, his determination to make their life work despite everything. But she couldn't ignore the sacrifices he was making. She couldn't ignore the way he pushed himself, just to make sure they had enough to pay the bills and keep their modest home running. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the garage, Desmond walked through the door, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. Olivia was waiting for him, her eyes filled with love, but also with a sadness she could no longer hide. She approached him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. Desmond could feel her trembling, and he pulled back slightly, looking down at her with concern. "Olivia, what's wrong?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. "Desmond, I hate seeing you like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You work so hard, and I know you're doing it for us. But I can't help feeling like I'm holding you back. You deserve so much more. You deserve a life without all this struggle." Desmond's heart ached at her words. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Olivia, I love our life together," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'd choose this life with you over a life of luxury without you any day. Don't ever think that you're holding me back. You're the reason I keep going." Olivia looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "But Desmond, it's not just about us. It's about the future we want to build. I don't want you to have to struggle like this forever. Maybe you should try to reconcile with your parents. Not for the money, but for the future we want. I know how much they mean to you, even if you won't admit it." Desmond closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath. He knew Olivia was right. As much as he loved the life they had built, he couldn't ignore how his choices were affecting her. She deserved the best, and he wanted to give her everything. If that meant swallowing his pride and facing his parents again, then he would do it. Not for himself, but for Olivia and the life they wanted to build together. The next morning, Desmond made up his mind. He would return to his parents' home and try to make peace. He didn't know how they would react, or if they would even be willing to listen, but he had to try. He owed it to Olivia, to their future, to at least make the attempt. When he arrived at the grand estate, the sight of the sprawling mansion brought back a flood of memories, some good, some painful. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked up to the front door. The butler, who had known Desmond since he was a child, opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise. "Master Desmond," the butler said, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and warmth. "It's good to see you, sir. Your parents are in the sitting room." Desmond nodded, giving the butler a small, grateful smile before making his way through the familiar halls. His footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors, and with each step, his resolve grew stronger. When he reached the sitting room, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Desmond returned to his family home with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. He was determined to make things right, not just for himself, but for Olivia, the woman he loved more than anything. As he stood at the grand front doors of the mansion, memories flooded back, some warm, others painful. He took a deep breath and knocked, his heart pounding in his chest. When the door opened, Desmond's parents were both surprised to see him. Mrs. Oba's eyes widened, and Mr. Oba's expression shifted from confusion to curiosity. Desmond stepped inside, his gaze meeting theirs with a mixture of hope and resolve. "Mom, Dad," he began, his voice steady. "I need to talk to you. It's about Olivia and our plans for the future." He spoke from the heart, telling them about how much Olivia meant to him, how her love had transformed his life, and how he couldn't imagine a future without her. He pleaded for their acceptance, not for himself, but for Olivia's sake. He wanted them to see her for who she really was, not for where she came from or what she lacked. Mrs. Oba listened closely, her heart slowly softening as she saw the sincerity in her son's eyes. She realized, perhaps for the first time, just how deeply Desmond cared for Olivia. She saw the love and determination that radiated from him, and it began to dawn on her that maybe, just maybe, she and her husband had been too harsh in their judgment. After a long silence, Mrs. Oba finally spoke, her voice gentle. "Desmond, if Olivia means that much to you, then maybe we've been wrong. Maybe we haven't given her a fair chance." She looked at her husband, who was still processing his son's words, and then back at Desmond. "I think it's time we meet her again." This time with an open heart. Desmond's heart lifted, a smile breaking across his face. He hadn't expected his mother to come around so quickly, but hearing her say those words gave him a renewed sense of hope. To everyone's surprise, it was Mrs. Oba who reached out first. A few days later, she called Desmond and asked him to invite Olivia to dinner. She wanted to get to know the woman who had captured her son's heart, and she wanted to do it properly this time, without judgment or preconceived notions. The evening of the dinner arrived, and Olivia was understandably nervous. She had faced judgment from Desmond's parents before, and though she was hopeful, she couldn't shake the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Desmond held her hand as they approached the door, whispering words of encouragement. "Just be yourself," he said. "That's all you need to do." The dinner started awkwardly. The room was filled with tension, the conversation polite but strained. Olivia felt the weight of the scrutiny, and for a moment, she feared that nothing had really changed. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. Olivia's genuine kindness, her humility, and her obvious love for Desmond began to shine through. She spoke about her family, her work, and the small joys in life that made her happy. She didn't try to impress them. She was simply herself, honest, warm, and kind. Slowly, the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable began to crumble. Mrs. Oba found herself smiling, truly smiling, as she listened to Olivia's stories. She began to see the qualities in Olivia that Desmond had seen all along. Her strength, her resilience, her capacity to love without conditions. Even Mr. Oba, who had been the most resistant, found his stern demeanor softening. He watched the way Olivia looked at his son, the way her eyes lit up whenever Desmond spoke, and he couldn't deny the happiness she brought to him. Desmond was more content, more at peace than Mr. Oba had ever seen him, and that, more than anything, made him reconsider his stance. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Laughter filled the room, and the warmth that had been missing for so long returned. Desmond looked at Olivia, his heart swelling with love and pride. They had faced so many challenges, but here they were, together, slowly bridging the gap between their worlds. In time, both Mr. and Mrs. Oba began to accept Olivia, not as an outsider, but as a part of their family. It wasn't an overnight transformation. There were still moments of tension, still hurdles to overcome. But the progress they had made that evening was real. Desmond knew they were on the right path. Desmond and Olivia's love had been tested, but it had endured. They had faced challenges, fought against prejudice, and in the end, their love had triumphed. Desmond knew he was lucky, not because of his wealth or status, but because he had found a woman who loved him for who he truly was. And now, finally, his family was beginning to see the beauty in that love as well. Dear viewers, what a journey it has been. Desmond's story is one of resilience, love, and the power of staying true to oneself. Love isn't about wealth or status. It's about seeing someone for who they truly are and accepting them, flaws and all. Desmond and Olivia taught us that real love can conquer even the toughest obstacles when it is genuine. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Desmond's shoes? Would you have had the courage to go against your family for love? Or if you were Olivia, would you have stayed by Desmond despite the hardships? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Also, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Have a story of your own? Feel free to share it with us in the comments or email us. We'd love to hear it. Thank you for joining us today, and as always, stay blessed and keep spreading love.